Hi, I'm Jane, and 3 years ago my sister Sarah called me broke and pathetic in front of our entire family during Thanksgiving dinner, while she bragged about landing her dream interview at Pinnacle Digital. What she didn't know was that I was the anonymous chairman who had been quietly building that company from the ground up, and her fate was literally in my hands. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon rolls filled my childhood home in Denver that November afternoon. But the warmth of the holiday couldn't penetrate the chill I felt, sitting at our family's dining room table. I smoothed down my simple black sweater and adjusted my worn jeans, trying to ignore how underdressed I looked compared to everyone else. Sarah sat across from me in her designer blazer, her perfectly styled auburn hair catching the light from Mom's chandelier as she held court with her latest achievements. My name is Jane Mitchell. And at 28, I had spent the last 6 years of my life building something extraordinary while living like a broke graduate student. Most people who knew me saw a quiet, unremarkable woman who worked odd consulting jobs and lived in a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. What they couldn't see was the empire I had been constructing in the shadows. The digital marketing company that had become one of the fastest-growing firms in the Midwest. Pinnacle Digital existed because of my vision, my 14-hour days, and my refusal to give up when everyone else said I was wasting my time. But to my family, especially Sarah, I was just the disappointment who never seemed to get her life together. Sarah had always been the golden child. 2 years younger than me, she had sailed through business school at Northwestern while I had dropped out of my MBA program to chase what everyone called pipe dreams. She landed prestigious internships at Fortune 500 companies, while I spent my nights coding websites and cold-calling potential clients from my studio apartment. When she graduated summa cum laude, our parents threw her a celebration party. When I launched my first successful marketing campaign for a local restaurant chain, nobody even noticed. The contrast between us had never been more apparent than that Thanksgiving afternoon. Sarah wore her success like expensive jewelry, every gesture designed to remind everyone in the room how well she was doing. Her Saint Laurent heels clicked against Mom's hardwood floors as she paced around the table, showing off photos on her phone of her downtown Chicago penthouse, her new BMW, and her corner office at Morrison and Associates, where she worked as a senior consultant. And the best part, Sarah announced, pausing dramatically as she set her phone down next to the cranberry sauce, is that I have an interview next week with Pinnacle Digital. You know that company everyone's talking about? They're absolutely revolutionizing digital marketing, and they want to meet with me about their Vice President of Client Relations position. I nearly choked on my wine. Pinnacle Digital. My company. The business I had built from nothing, operating under the corporate veil of Mitchell Holdings to maintain my anonymity. For 3 years, I had deliberately kept my identity hidden from the public, working through my executive team and never appearing in company photos or press releases. The business world knew Pinnacle Digital was owned by a private investment firm, but nobody knew that the mysterious chairman was a 28-year-old woman who still shopped at Target and drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," my mother Linda gushed, reaching over to squeeze Sarah's manicured hand. "Tell us more about this company. What makes them so special?" Sarah's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm she usually reserved for designer handbag sales. "Mom, they're incredible." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. They've grown by 400% in just 2 years. Their client roster includes major brands like Zenith Electronics and Aurora Fashion. The chairman is supposed to be some kind of business genius, though nobody knows who they really are. Very mysterious, very exclusive. Getting this interview is like winning the lottery. I forced myself to take another sip of wine, fighting to keep my expression neutral. Aurora Fashion had been one of my most challenging accounts, requiring a complete overhaul of their social media strategy and a rebranding campaign that took 8 months to execute. Zenith Electronics had come to us after their previous marketing firm had nearly tanked their latest product launch. I had personally worked with their CEO to develop a viral marketing campaign that had exceeded their sales targets by 60%. But listening to Sarah talk about my achievements as if they belonged to some mythical business mogul felt surreal and infuriating at the same time. The salary range they mentioned, Sarah continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially, starts at $250,000 plus equity options. Can you imagine? I'll finally be making the kind of money that reflects my worth. My father, Robert, nodded approvingly from his position at the head of the table. You've worked hard for this opportunity, Sarah. Your dedication to excellence has always set you apart. I waited for someone to ask about my work, about what I had been doing with my life, but the conversation remained firmly focused on Sarah's upcoming interview. My Aunt Margaret chimed in with questions about the company's benefits package, while my cousin David wanted to know if Pinnacle Digital might be hiring for other positions. Everyone seemed fascinated by this mysterious company that had captured Sarah's imagination, completely unaware that its creator was sitting right there among them, invisible as always. "What about you, Jane?" my Uncle Paul asked during a brief lull in Sarah's presentation. "Any exciting career developments we should know about?" I felt the familiar heat of embarrassment creep up my neck as every face at the table turned toward me, with expressions ranging from polite interest to barely concealed pity. Sarah's smirk was particularly hard to miss, her perfectly glossed lips curved in anticipation of whatever fumbling response I might offer. "I'm still doing consulting work," I said quietly, pushing green beans around on my plate. "Helping small businesses with their digital presence, website development, that sort of thing." "Still?" Sarah's voice carried just enough concern to sound caring while delivering maximum impact. "Jane, you've been doing that for years now. Don't you think it's time to consider something more stable, more substantial?" The word substantial hung in the air like smoke, carrying with it all the implications Sarah intended. My work wasn't substantial. My life wasn't substantial. I wasn't substantial, not compared to her corner office and designer wardrobe and six-figure salary. "Some people are late bloomers," my mother offered weakly, clearly trying to be supportive but somehow making everything worse. "Jane will find her path eventually." "Will she, though?" Sarah leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her own worth. "I mean, at what point do we stop calling it finding your path and start calling it what it really is?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in my parents' hallway ticking away the seconds, while everyone waited to see if Sarah would actually voice whatever cruel observation was forming behind her calculating green eyes. "What it really is," she continued, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she had perfected over years of looking down on people she considered beneath her, "is being broke and pathetic." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs and sending a wave of heat through my chest. Broke and pathetic. After everything I had built, everything I'd accomplished in secret, my own sister saw me as nothing more than a cautionary tale about what happened when someone aimed too low and settled for too little. "Sarah," my father said sharply, but there was no real force behind the reprimand. He was embarrassed by the outburst, not outraged by the cruelty. "What? I'm just being honest," Sarah replied, throwing her hands up in mock innocence. "We're all thinking it. Jane is almost 30 years old, still living like a college student, still chasing these little side projects that never amount to anything real. Meanwhile, successful companies like Pinnacle Digital are looking for people with actual accomplishments, actual value to bring to the table." I stared down at my plate, watching the gravy congeal around my untouched mashed potatoes, while my family absorbed Sarah's assessment of my life. Nobody rushed to my defense. Nobody pointed out that small business consulting was actually valuable work, or that not everyone needed to climb corporate ladders to find fulfillment. They just sat there in uncomfortable silence, probably relieved that they weren't the target of Sarah's verbal assault. "I think," my mother said finally, her voice artificially bright, "we should focus on celebrating Sarah's wonderful opportunity instead of dwelling on negative things." Negative things. As if my entire existence was something unpleasant that needed to be swept under the rug so the real success story could continue. I excused myself from the table, mumbling something about needing fresh air, and stepped out onto my parents' back deck. The November wind cut through my thin sweater, but the cold felt appropriate somehow, matching the ice that had formed around my heart as I replayed Sarah's words. Broke and pathetic. The sister who had shared a bedroom with me for 16 years. Who had cried on my shoulder when her high school boyfriend cheated on her. Who had borrowed my car more times than I could count. Had just dismissed my entire life as worthless in front of our extended family. Through the sliding glass door, I could see the dinner conversation resuming as if nothing had happened. Sarah was back to showing photos on her phone, probably describing her interview outfit or speculating about her future office at Pinnacle Digital. My parents were nodding and smiling, basking in the reflected glory of their successful daughter while their other child stood outside in the cold, trying to process the depth of their indifference. That was the moment I made my decision. For 3 years, I had kept my identity as Pinnacle Digital's chairman secret. Partly for business reasons and partly because I enjoyed the privacy it afforded me. I could build something amazing without dealing with the pressure and scrutiny that came with public recognition. But as I stood on that deck watching my family celebrate the very company I had created while dismissing me as a failure, I realized that anonymity had become a prison. Sarah wanted to work for Pinnacle Digital. She wanted to be part of the success story I had written with my own blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. She wanted the salary, the prestige, the equity options that came with joining a company she considered the pinnacle of business achievement. What she didn't want was to acknowledge that her broken, pathetic sister might have anything valuable to contribute to the world. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Marcus Chen, Pinnacle Digital's chief operating officer and one of only 3 people who knew my true identity. Marcus had been my first hire, a brilliant strategist who had left his position at a major advertising firm to take a chance on my vision when Pinnacle was nothing more than an idea and a rented office space above a coffee shop. "Jane?" Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice filled with surprise. "Everything okay? You don't usually call on holidays." "I need you to schedule an interview," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "Sarah Mitchell, my sister. She's applying for the VP of Client Relations position." "Okay," Marcus replied slowly. "Any special instructions? Should we fast-track her application?" I watched through the glass door as Sarah threw her head back in laughter at something my cousin had said, her whole body radiating the kind of confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. "Schedule the interview," I repeated, "but I want to conduct it personally." There was a pause on Marcus's end as he processed what I was really asking. "You want to reveal your identity to your sister during a job interview?" "That's exactly what I want to do." "Jane," Marcus said carefully, "are you sure about this? Once you break cover, there's no going back. Your anonymity has been one of our biggest strategic advantages." I thought about that for a moment, weighing the implications of what I was considering. Going public as Pinnacle Digital's chairman would change everything. The business press would want interviews. Competitors would scrutinize my every move. The comfortable anonymity that had allowed me to build my company without external pressure would disappear forever. But as I watched Sarah continue her performance for our captive family audience, describing her qualifications for a position at the company I had built from nothing, I realized that some things were more important than strategic advantages. "I'm sure," I told Marcus. "Set it up for next Friday. Conference Room A, the one with the view of the Chicago skyline." "And Marcus?" "Make sure she knows the chairman will be conducting the interview personally. I want her to expect something special." After I hung up, I remained on the deck for several more minutes, letting the cold air clear my head and steel my resolve for what would come next. When I finally went back inside, Sarah was in the middle of describing her interview preparation strategy, complete with the power suit she planned to wear, and the research she had been conducting on Pinnacle Digital's company culture. "Jane," my mother said as I slipped back into my seat, "we were just talking about how Sarah should prepare for her big interview. Maybe you could give her some advice about working with smaller companies. I'm sure some of your consulting experience might be relevant." The suggestion was clearly meant to make me feel included, but it only highlighted how completely my family misunderstood both my work and Sarah's opportunity. They saw my consulting experience as something small and limited, barely worthy of Sarah's consideration as she prepared to enter the big leagues. "I don't think Jane's experience is really applicable here," Sarah said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Pinnacle Digital operates at a completely different level than the mom-and-pop shops Jane works with. This is corporate strategy, major client relationships, the kind of high-stakes business that requires real expertise. I nodded as if I agreed with her assessment, playing my role as the family underachiever, while inside my mind began calculating exactly how I would orchestrate her upcoming revelation. Sarah was so confident in her superiority, so certain that her MBA and corporate experience had prepared her for anything the business world could throw at her. She had no idea that she was about to walk into an interview with the very person she had just called broke and pathetic, the sister whose life's work she was dismissing as irrelevant. "You're probably right," I said quietly, offering Sarah a small smile that she interpreted as admiration but was actually anticipation. "I'm sure you'll do great at the interview." "Thanks," she replied, with the kind of patronizing kindness people use when they feel genuinely sorry for someone. "I really hope this opens doors for me. Working at a company like Pinnacle Digital would be a dream come true." As the evening wound down and family members began gathering their coats and saying their goodbyes, I hugged Sarah with the knowledge that the next time we saw each other, everything would be different. She squeezed me back with what felt like genuine affection, probably feeling generous in her moment of triumph. "Take care of yourself, Jane," she said as she pulled away. "And don't give up on finding something better. Even if it takes a while longer, I'm sure something will work out for you eventually." I drove home to my modest apartment that night with Sarah's words echoing in my mind, but instead of the shame and hurt I had felt earlier, I found myself filled with a cold, calculating energy. For years, I had accepted my family's perception of me as the disappointing daughter, the one who couldn't quite measure up to Sarah's conventional success. I had let them believe that my unconventional path was evidence of failure rather than the foundation of something extraordinary. But in 7 days, Sarah would walk into Pinnacle Digital's headquarters, expecting to impress a mysterious chairman with her qualifications and ambitions. Instead, she would discover that the broke and pathetic sister she had just humiliated in front of their entire family was the architect of everything she had ever wanted to achieve. The irony was almost poetic. Sarah's dream job interview would become the moment she finally understood who I really was and what I had really accomplished while she was busy looking down on me. And unlike the family dinner where I had sat in silence while she attacked my worth, this time I would have all the power in the room. As I unlocked my apartment door and stepped into the space that Sarah would probably describe as pathetic compared to her downtown penthouse, I smiled for the first time all day. My modest surroundings didn't bother me anymore because I knew they were a choice, not a limitation. I lived simply because I had been pouring everything into building something bigger than myself, something that would outlast any corner office or designer wardrobe. Pinnacle Digital had 57 employees, 12 major clients, an annual revenue that had just surpassed $20 million. The company Sarah was desperately hoping to join was my creation, my vision made real, through 3 years of 18-hour workdays and strategic decisions that had positioned us as leaders in our industry. And in 1 week, she would discover that the pathetic failure of a sister she had just humiliated was actually the most successful person she had ever known. The week that followed Thanksgiving passed with excruciating slowness. Every morning I woke up in my small apartment and went through the motions of my carefully constructed ordinary life, while anticipating the moment when everything would change. I continued taking meetings with my small business clients, updating their social media accounts and troubleshooting their website issues, all while knowing that these modest consulting fees were merely pocket change compared to the empire I had built in secret. On Monday morning, I sat in a cramped coffee shop with Mrs. Rodriguez, who owned a small bakery downtown and needed help promoting her holiday specials online. She paid me $200 for 3 hours of work, grateful for my expertise, and treating me with the kind of respect I never received from my own family. As I helped her craft Instagram posts and set up a Facebook advertising campaign, I found myself thinking about the contrast between her genuine appreciation and Sarah's dismissive attitude toward my work. Mrs. Rodriguez saw value in what I did because it directly impacted her business. Her online sales had increased by 40% since we started working together 6 months ago, allowing her to hire 2 additional employees and expand her catering services. But to Sarah, helping small businesses succeed was somehow less worthy than climbing corporate ladders at companies someone else had built. Tuesday brought a client meeting with Tom Harrison, who had opened an auto repair shop after 20 years working for other people. He had struggled to compete with the chain stores until I developed a digital marketing strategy that highlighted his personalized service and decades of experience. Now his appointment book stayed full weeks in advance, and he was considering opening a second location. As Tom showed me pictures of his growing business and thanked me for helping him achieve his dream of independence, I realized that my work had always been about empowerment. I helped people build something of their own, create value on their own terms, succeed without having to fit into someone else's definition of achievement. The irony was that while I was empowering others to break free from limitations, I had been allowing my own family to limit their perception of my worth. Wednesday evening, my phone rang with a call from Marcus Chen. I answered eagerly, hungry for any update about the arrangements for Friday's interview. "Everything is set up exactly as you requested," Marcus reported. "Sarah Mitchell has confirmed her appointment for Friday at 2 p.m. Conference room A is reserved, and I've made sure the security desk knows to give her VIP treatment when she arrives." The whole executive team is buzzing with curiosity about why you're finally revealing your identity, but I haven't told anyone the personal connection. "Good," I replied, pacing around my small living room. "What did you tell her about the chairman?" "Just that they specifically requested to conduct the interview personally, which is extremely rare." I may have implied that this level of attention indicates serious consideration for the position. She sounded both thrilled and nervous when I called her. I could imagine Sarah's reaction perfectly. She had probably spent the last few days researching everything publicly available about Pinnacle Digital's mysterious leadership, trying to prepare for an encounter with someone she assumed would be a powerful businessman decades older than herself. The reality was going to be a shock that would reshape everything she thought she knew about success, family, and her own place in the world. "How do you want to handle the reveal?" Marcus asked. "Should I be in the room for support, or do you want to do this completely alone?" I considered the question carefully. Having Marcus present would provide a witness to Sarah's reaction and potentially make the whole encounter feel more professional and less personal. But this confrontation was deeply personal, rooted in years of dismissal and culminating in her cruel declaration that I was broke and pathetic. I wanted her to experience the full impact of discovering my true identity without any buffers or distractions. Alone, I decided. But have security ready in case things get heated. And Marcus? Make sure the conference room's recording system is activated. I want documentation of this meeting. Understood. Jane, are you sure you're emotionally prepared for this? Family dynamics can be complicated, and once you cross this line, there's no going back to anonymity. I appreciated Marcus's concern, but my decision had been made the moment Sarah had dismissed my life as worthless in front of our entire family. For 3 years, I had hidden my success behind corporate structures and anonymous ownership, allowing people to underestimate me while I built something extraordinary. The strategy had served its purpose, but now it was time for a different approach. Thursday morning brought an unexpected text message from Sarah herself. "Jane, I know you probably think this is silly, but I'm really nervous about tomorrow's interview. I've never wanted anything this badly before. Wish me luck?" I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a complex mix of emotions. There was genuine vulnerability in her words, a rare admission that the confident facade she usually projected wasn't as solid as she pretended. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, remembering the little sister who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and beg me to read her bedtime stories. But then I remembered her voice as she called me broke and pathetic, the satisfaction in her eyes as she delivered the verbal blow that was meant to put me in my place permanently. Sarah had chosen to see me as a failure rather than recognize the quiet determination that had driven me to build something remarkable. Her nervousness about the interview was rooted in her desperation to join a company she admired, never imagining that the person she had just humiliated was the architect of everything she aspired to achieve. I typed back a simple response. "You'll do great. Just be yourself." It wasn't entirely dishonest. Sarah being herself was exactly what I wanted her to be during our interview. I wanted her to display the same arrogance and dismissiveness, that had characterized her treatment of me. I wanted her to demonstrate the entitled attitude that made her believe she deserved success without having earned it the way I had, through years of sacrifice and relentless work. That evening, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror trying on different outfits for the next day's revelation. My wardrobe consisted mostly of comfortable, practical clothes that wouldn't look out of place in a coffee shop or small business office. But tomorrow required something different, something that would command immediate respect and authority. I settled on a charcoal gray suit I had purchased but never worn, a tailored piece that transformed my usually casual appearance into something unmistakably executive. The jacket fit perfectly, creating clean lines that spoke of power and control. I paired it with a crisp white blouse and low heels that were professional without being flashy. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw someone who belonged in a corporate boardroom, someone who could credibly claim to have built a $20 million company from nothing. The transformation was remarkable. For so long, I had dressed the part of the struggling consultant, the family disappointment who couldn't quite get her life together. But the woman looking back at me from the mirror was clearly successful, clearly in control, clearly someone who commanded respect rather than pity. I spent the rest of the evening reviewing Sarah's resume and application materials, which Marcus had forwarded to me earlier in the week. On paper, she looked impressive. Northwestern MBA, 5 years of progressively responsible positions at Morrison and Associates, strong references from supervisors who praised her analytical skills and client management abilities. She had the kind of conventional credentials that looked good in a corporate environment. But as I read through her application, I noticed what was missing. There was no evidence of creativity, no indication that she had ever built anything from scratch or taken the kind of risks that real leadership required. Her entire career had been about climbing ladders within existing structures, following predetermined paths to predictable outcomes. She had never created value, only managed it. The contrast with my own journey was stark. While Sarah had been accumulating credentials and collecting promotions, I had been learning to identify opportunities where others saw only problems. I had developed the ability to envision possibilities that didn't yet exist, and then work tirelessly to make them real. The consulting work that my family dismissed as insignificant had actually been my education in understanding how businesses really functioned at the ground level, how to solve problems that couldn't be addressed with theories from textbooks. Friday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, as if the universe had decided to provide perfect conditions for the day that would change everything. I woke up earlier than usual, my body humming with anticipatory energy that made sleep impossible. I made coffee and sat by my window watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and pink, thinking about how different everything would be by sunset. At 10 a.m. I drove to Pinnacle Digital's headquarters in downtown Chicago, the gleaming 30-story tower that housed my company's offices on floors 25 through 29. The building's lobby was a study in modern elegance, with marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered spectacular views of the city skyline. A massive digital display near the elevators cycled through images of Pinnacle Digital's recent campaigns, showcasing the creative work that had established our reputation as industry leaders. I rode the elevator to the 28th floor, where my personal office was located behind doors marked Chairman in understated bronze lettering. The space was designed to impress without being ostentatious, featuring clean lines, carefully chosen artwork, and a conference table that could seat 12 people comfortably. The wall behind my desk was entirely glass, offering an unobstructed view of Lake Michigan and the surrounding urban landscape. Marcus was waiting for me when I arrived, his expression a mixture of excitement and concern. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, studying my face for any signs of last-minute doubt. "I've been ready for years," I replied, settling into my chair and reviewing the notes I had prepared for the interview. I just didn't know it until now. At 1:30, Marcus called to let me know that Sarah had arrived and was being escorted to Conference Room A. "She looks nervous but confident," he reported. "Very professional appearance, definitely dressed to impress." Security says she spent several minutes in the lobby just staring up at the company logo. I could picture the scene perfectly. Sarah standing in our marble lobby, looking up at the Pinnacle Digital name and logo, probably feeling a mixture of awe and ambition, as she prepared to meet the mysterious chairman who might hold the key to her dream career. She had no idea that the person she was about to face was the same sister she had called broke and pathetic just 5 days earlier. "Give me 5 more minutes," I told Marcus. "Then bring her to my office instead of the conference room. I want her to see the full scope of what I've built here." Those final minutes passed with agonizing slowness. I stood by my office windows, looking out at the city where I had spent 3 years building something extraordinary while living in deliberate obscurity. Chicago stretched out below me, a tapestry of ambition and achievement where countless people worked to create value and build futures for themselves and their families. I had found my place in that landscape, carved out my own territory through vision and relentless effort. At exactly 2 p.m., there was a soft knock on my door. "Come in," I called, not turning away from the windows. I heard the door open and Marcus's voice making introductions. "Sarah Mitchell, I'd like you to meet our chairman and chief executive officer." I turned around slowly, savoring the moment before Sarah's world shifted permanently off its axis. She stood in my doorway wearing a navy blue power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her auburn hair styled in a perfect chignon, her makeup applied with the precision of someone who understood the importance of first impressions. She looked every inch the successful corporate executive she aspired to be, but as her eyes met mine, her confident expression began to crumble into confusion, then shock, then complete disbelief. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The portfolio she had been carrying slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. "Hello, Sarah," I said calmly, gesturing toward the chairs arranged in front of my desk. "Please, have a seat. I understand you're interested in joining our team here at Pinnacle Digital." The silence that followed was profound. Sarah's eyes darted around the office, taking in the expensive furniture, the wall of awards and recognitions, the panoramic view of downtown Chicago that only someone with significant corporate power could command. Her gaze kept returning to me, as if she were trying to reconcile the sister she had dismissed as a failure with the obviously successful executive standing before her. "Jane?" she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. "What are you doing here? How are you here?" I moved to my desk and settled into the leather chair that had become as familiar to me as my own reflection. From this position, I could see Sarah's face clearly, could watch every emotion play across her features as she struggled to process what was happening. "I'm here," I said, keeping my voice professionally neutral, "because this is my office, this is my company. I am the chairman and CEO of Pinnacle Digital. The company you've been telling everyone represents everything you've ever wanted to achieve." Sarah's legs seemed to give out beneath her, and she sank into one of the chairs without invitation. Her hands were shaking slightly as she gripped the armrests, her knuckles white with tension. "That's impossible," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, her eyes were cataloging all the evidence to the contrary. My name was etched on a crystal paperweight on my desk. The photos on my credenza showed me shaking hands with clients she had mentioned wanting to work with. The degrees hanging on my wall bore my name in elegant calligraphy. "Is it impossible?" I asked, leaning back in my chair with the casual confidence of someone completely in control of the situation. "Or is it just impossible for you to accept that your broke and pathetic sister could have built something like this?" The color drained from Sarah's face as my words hit their target. She remembered exactly what she had said at Thanksgiving dinner, could probably recall the satisfaction she had felt while delivering her assessment of my worth in front of our entire family. "Jane, I can explain," she began, but I held up a hand to stop her. "There's nothing to explain," I said calmly. "You were very clear about your opinion of me and my life. Broke and pathetic, I believe, were your exact words. You dismissed my consulting work as irrelevant, suggested that I was too old to still be finding my path, and made it clear that you considered me a cautionary tale about settling for too little." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't sure if they were tears of remorse or simply tears of shock at having her worldview shattered so completely. "But if you're the chairman," she said slowly, her voice gaining strength as her mind began working through the implications, "then you've been lying to all of us for years. You've been pretending to struggle while secretly running a major company. Why would you do that?" The question revealed so much about how Sarah's mind worked. Even in this moment of revelation, she was focused on what I had done wrong rather than examining her own assumptions and prejudices. She couldn't understand why someone would choose privacy over publicity, why building something meaningful might be more important than receiving credit and recognition. I wasn't pretending to struggle, I corrected her. I was struggling. Building a company from nothing requires sacrifice, Sarah. It means living modestly while you invest everything in your vision. It means working 18-hour days while everyone around you thinks you're wasting your time. It means accepting that people will judge you based on appearances rather than accomplishments. I stood up and walked to the window wall, gesturing toward the city below. For 3 years, I poured everything I had into building this company. Every dollar of profit went back into growth. Every spare moment was spent developing strategies, cultivating client relationships, refining our services. Yes, I lived in a small apartment and drove an old car and wore clothes from Target. But I did that by choice, because I was building something bigger than myself. But why keep it secret? Sarah pressed, still struggling to understand. Why not tell the family? Why let us think you were failing? I turned back to face her, and for the first time since she had entered my office, I allowed some of my real emotions to show through my professional facade. Because I wanted to see who you all really were, I said quietly. I wanted to know whether your love and respect were conditional on my success as you defined it. And I learned that they were. As long as you thought I was the family disappointment, you felt free to dismiss my work, patronize my choices, and treat me like a charity case who needed your pity. Sarah flinched as if I had physically struck her. That's not fair. We love you, Jane. We've always loved you. Have you? I asked. Because love without respect isn't really love, is it? It's just habit mixed with obligation. You loved the idea of having a sister, but you never bothered to value who I actually was, or what I was actually doing with my life. The truth of my words hung between us like a sword, sharp and cutting and impossible to deny. Sarah sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that this wasn't just about a job interview or a surprising revelation about my identity. This was about years of accumulated slights, dismissive comments, and assumptions that had culminated in her cruel assessment of my worth. What happens now? She asked finally, her voice small and uncertain. I returned to my desk and picked up her resume, scanning it as if I were genuinely considering her qualifications for the position she had applied for. Now, I said, we conduct your interview for the Vice President of Client Relations position. After all, that's why you're here, isn't it? To convince the chairman of Pinnacle Digital that you have what it takes to succeed at this company. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized that despite everything that had just been revealed, I was still going to put her through the formal interview process. She was going to have to sit in my office and try to convince me that she deserved to work for the company I had built, the same company she had been using as evidence of her own superiority just days earlier. Unless, I continued, watching her face carefully, you've decided that you're no longer interested in the position. I would understand if learning about my involvement has changed your perspective on working here. It was a test, and we both knew it. Sarah could walk out of my office right now, preserving what remained of her dignity, while acknowledging that she couldn't work for the sister she had so recently humiliated. Or she could stay and go through the interview, subjecting herself to the ultimate reversal of power dynamics. Sarah straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin, some of her natural confidence returning as she made her decision. No, she said firmly. I still want this position. I've wanted to work here for months, long before I knew about your involvement. My interest in Pinnacle Digital has nothing to do with family connections and everything to do with professional opportunity. I nodded approvingly, genuinely impressed by her choice to stay and fight for what she wanted, despite the awkwardness of the situation. Excellent, I said, settling back into interview mode. Then let's begin. I opened Sarah's portfolio and spread her materials across my desk with the deliberate precision of someone who had conducted hundreds of interviews over the years. Her resume looked impressive laid out on the mahogany surface, but I knew that credentials on paper were often very different from actual capability in practice. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair as I took my time reviewing documents I had already memorized, letting the silence stretch between us while she absorbed the full reality of our reversed positions. Let's start with your experience at Morrison & Associates, I said. my voice taking on the cool, professional tone I used with all potential hires. I see you've been there for 5 years, progressing from junior consultant to senior consultant. Tell me about your most significant achievement during that time. Sarah cleared her throat, visibly struggling to transition from the shocked sister to the confident job candidate she needed to be. I led the digital transformation project for Hartwell Manufacturing last year. It was a 6-month engagement that resulted in a 40% increase in their operational efficiency and saved them approximately $2 million annually. I made a note on her resume, though I was really observing how she presented herself under pressure. Impressive numbers. What specific role did you play in achieving those results? I was the project lead responsible for analyzing their existing processes, identifying inefficiencies, and implementing new systems. I coordinated with their IT department, trained their staff on new procedures, and created metrics to track our progress. Her answer was textbook perfect, exactly what she had been taught to say in business school and corporate training programs. But it revealed the fundamental difference between her approach and mine. Sarah had taken an existing framework and applied it to a client's problems, following proven methodologies to achieve predictable results. I had created frameworks from scratch, invented solutions that didn't exist before, and built something entirely new. And what was your biggest challenge on that project? I continued, watching her face for any signs of genuine insight. The biggest challenge was change management. Hartwell had been operating the same way for decades, and there was significant resistance from longtime employees who were comfortable with the status quo. I had to develop a communication strategy that helped them understand the benefits of the new processes while addressing their concerns about job security. Again, a competent answer that showed she could handle standard corporate challenges. But nothing she described required the kind of vision or risk-taking that building a company from nothing demanded. Interesting, I said, leaning back in my chair. Now let me ask you something more specific to Pinnacle Digital. What do you see as the biggest challenges facing digital marketing companies in today's market? Sarah's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm she always showed when discussing topics she considered herself expert in. The biggest challenge is definitely the constantly evolving landscape of social media platforms and advertising algorithms. Companies have to stay agile and adapt their strategies almost daily to maintain effectiveness. There's also increasing competition as more traditional marketing firms expand into digital services. Her answer demonstrated that she had done her homework about the industry, but it focused entirely on responding to external changes rather than creating them. I decided to push deeper. Those are certainly challenges, I agreed. But what about opportunities? If you were running a digital marketing company, what would you do to not just survive these changes but capitalize on them? Sarah paused, and I could see her mind working through possibilities she hadn't fully considered before. I think the key would be specialization. Instead of trying to be everything to everyone, I would focus on becoming the absolute best at serving specific industries or types of clients. Maybe developing proprietary tools or methodologies that competitors couldn't easily replicate. I was genuinely surprised by the quality of her response. It showed strategic thinking beyond the surface-level challenges she had initially identified. For the first time since she had entered my office, I caught a glimpse of why she had been successful in her corporate career. That's an insightful perspective, I said, making another note. In fact, it's very similar to the strategy we've implemented here at Pinnacle Digital. We've focused on becoming specialists in integrated campaigns that combine traditional digital marketing with emerging technologies like augmented reality and artificial intelligence. Sarah's face brightened with interest, and for a moment she seemed to forget the awkwardness of being interviewed by her sister. That's fascinating. I've been following some of the AR marketing campaigns that have gone viral recently, and I wondered who was behind the really sophisticated ones. Several of those were our work, I confirmed, including the Aurora fashion campaign that let customers virtually try on clothing through their smartphones, and the Zenith Electronics launch that created interactive product demonstrations in people's living rooms. I watched Sarah's expression change as she realized she was learning about campaigns I had personally conceived and executed, projects that had required months of development and coordination with technology partners who had never attempted anything similar before. These weren't consulting assignments where she could apply existing solutions to familiar problems. They were creative breakthroughs that had required me to envision possibilities that didn't yet exist. "How did you even begin to develop something like that?" she asked, her professional curiosity overriding her personal discomfort. The technical requirements alone must have been enormous. It started with recognizing that consumers were ready for more interactive experiences, I explained, warming to the subject despite myself. Traditional online shopping was becoming commoditized, so we needed to create something that would make our clients' products stand out. I spent months researching AR technology, building relationships with developers, and testing prototypes before we ever pitched the concept to Aurora Fashion. Sarah listened intently, and I could see her processing the implications of what I was describing. The sister she had dismissed as broke and pathetic had been pioneering marketing techniques that were now being copied by major agencies across the industry. "But that kind of innovation requires significant upfront investment," she said slowly. "How did you convince clients to pay for unproven technology?" The question revealed that she was beginning to understand the true scope of what I had accomplished. It was one thing to implement established solutions for corporate clients who had budgets for proven strategies. It was entirely different to convince businesses to invest in experimental approaches that might not work. "Initially, I didn't," I admitted. "For the first 18 months, every innovative project we developed was funded out of our own revenue. I took the financial risk personally because I believed in the potential impact." When the Aurora Fashion campaign increased their online sales by 300% in the first quarter, suddenly everyone wanted to know how we had done it. Sarah's eyes widened as she absorbed the numbers I had just shared. 300% growth was the kind of result that could transform a company's entire trajectory, the kind of success that established reputations and created industry legends. "You risked your own money on unproven technology?" she asked, her voice carrying a new note of respect. "I risked everything," I corrected her. "There were months when I wasn't sure we could make payroll, when I had to choose between paying myself and paying our developers. But I knew that if we could prove the concept worked, we would establish Pinnacle Digital as the leader in next-generation marketing solutions." The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet that had greeted my initial revelation. This was the silence of someone recalculating everything they thought they knew about risk, innovation, and what it really took to build something extraordinary. "Jane," Sarah said finally, dropping the formal interview pretense for a moment, "I had no idea. When I said those things at Thanksgiving, I genuinely thought you were struggling, barely getting by with small consulting projects. I never imagined you were building something like this." I appreciated her honesty, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook for the assumptions that had led to her cruel assessment of my life. "But why did you assume I was struggling?" I asked. "Because I lived modestly? Because I didn't drive a luxury car or wear designer clothes? Or because you couldn't imagine that someone could choose a different path to success than the one you had followed?" Sarah flinched, recognizing the accuracy of my observation. "I think it was all of those things. In my world, success has visible markers: the right job title, the right salary, the right lifestyle. When I didn't see those things in your life, I assumed you weren't successful. And what does that tell you about how you define value?" I pressed, genuinely curious about her self-reflection. "That I've been defining it too narrowly," she admitted. "I've been so focused on climbing ladders within existing systems that I never considered what it would take to build the ladder itself." Her answer surprised me with its insight and apparent sincerity. The Sarah I had grown up with rarely admitted mistakes or acknowledged that her perspective might be limited. But sitting in my office, confronted with undeniable evidence that her worldview had been fundamentally flawed, she seemed genuinely willing to examine her assumptions. "Let's return to the interview," I said, deciding to test whether her newfound humility would extend to accepting criticism of her professional qualifications. "Based on what you've learned about Pinnacle Digital's approach to innovation, why do you think you would be effective as our Vice President of Client Relations?" Sarah took a deep breath, clearly understanding that this was her opportunity to make a case for herself, despite the personal complications of our relationship. "Honestly, based on what you've just told me, I'm not sure I would be effective in that role," she said, shocking me with her candor. My experience has been in implementing solutions within established frameworks, not in pioneering new approaches or taking the kind of creative risks that seem to define your company culture. I leaned forward, intrigued by her unexpected honesty. Most job candidates would have tried to spin their experience to match what they thought I wanted to hear, regardless of how genuine the connection might be. Then why are you still sitting in that chair? I asked. Why not withdraw your application and look for opportunities that better match your skill set? Sarah met my eyes directly, and for the first time since she had entered my office, I saw something that reminded me of the determined little sister who used to practice piano for hours, until she mastered pieces that initially seemed impossible. Because I want to learn, she said simply. I want to understand how you think, how you identify opportunities that others miss, how you build something from nothing. I've spent 5 years becoming really good at working within other people's systems, but you've shown me that the real innovation happens when you create new systems entirely. Her response was more honest and self-aware than anything I had expected from the confident corporate executive who had walked into my office an hour earlier. The shock of discovering my true identity had apparently stripped away some of the professional polish that usually characterized her interactions, revealing someone who was genuinely curious about learning and growth. And you think you could transition from implementing solutions to creating them? I asked, testing her commitment to this new perspective. I don't know, Sarah answered truthfully. But I'd like the chance to find out. I realize that everything I thought I knew about success and innovation has been challenged today. Maybe I need to be challenged more often. I studied her face, looking for signs that she was simply telling me what she thought I wanted to hear. But her expression seemed genuine, lacking the calculated confidence she usually projected when trying to impress people. The position you applied for would require you to work directly with me, I pointed out. Given our family history and what happened at Thanksgiving, do you think you could maintain appropriate professional boundaries? Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. I think our family history might actually be an advantage in some ways. I already know that you don't accept mediocrity or settle for conventional approaches. I know that you expect people to prove themselves through results rather than credentials. And I know that you won't give me special treatment because we're related. You're right about that last part, I confirmed. If anything, I would hold you to higher standards than other employees. Family connections would never protect you from consequences if you failed to perform. I would expect nothing less, Sarah replied. And honestly, after what I said at Thanksgiving, you would have every right to hold me accountable for proving that I can contribute value, rather than just taking up space. The conversation had evolved far beyond a typical job interview into something that felt more like negotiation between equals, both of us acknowledging the complexity of mixing family relationships with professional responsibilities. There's something else we need to address, I said, deciding to test her reaction to the full scope of what working at Pinnacle Digital would mean. This company is my vision, built according to my values and strategic priorities. If you work here, you would be contributing to my success, helping to build my legacy. How would that feel, considering that just days ago you were telling people I was broke and pathetic? Sarah winced at the reminder of her harsh words, but she didn't try to deflect or minimize what she had said. It would feel like justice, she said quietly. Not punishment, but justice. I made a cruel and ignorant judgment about your worth, based on superficial observations and my own narrow definitions of success. Working to support your vision would give me the chance to learn what real achievement looks like and to contribute to something genuinely innovative instead of just managing other people's ideas. I was impressed despite myself by her response. The proud, dismissive sister who had humiliated me at Thanksgiving dinner had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely committed to understanding her own limitations and learning from someone she had previously underestimated. All right, I said, making a decision that surprised even me. Here's what I'm willing to offer. A 6-month probationary period in a junior client relations role, not the VP position you originally applied for. You would work directly under our current VP to learn our methodologies and prove that you can adapt to our innovative approach. Your salary would be significantly less than what you're making at Morrison and Associates, and there would be no guarantee of advancement. Sarah's eyes widened as she processed the offer. I was essentially asking her to take a step backward in her career, accepting a lower-level position and reduced compensation for the opportunity to learn a different approach to business. "And at the end of 6 months?" she asked. "If you've demonstrated that you can think creatively, take calculated risks, and contribute to genuine innovation rather than just implementing existing solutions, we'll discuss a permanent position at a level commensurate with your proven abilities. If not, you'll have gained some valuable experience and can return to the corporate consulting world with a better understanding of how innovation actually works." The offer hung between us, like a bridge across the chasm that had opened in our relationship. Sarah could accept it and subject herself to the humiliation of working for the sister she had dismissed, starting over at a lower level and proving herself all over again. Or she could reject it and maintain her current position and salary while acknowledging that she wasn't willing to step outside her comfort zone. "I accept," Sarah said without hesitation. "When would you want me to start?" Her immediate acceptance told me that she was serious about wanting to change and learn, rather than just trying to save face after her earlier mistakes. 2 weeks, I replied. "That will give you time to provide proper notice at Morrison and Associates and prepare for a very different kind of work environment." Sarah nodded, then hesitated before asking the question I could see forming in her mind. "Jane, what do we tell the family? About your company, about me working here, about everything?" I had been wondering the same thing myself. Our parents and extended family still thought of me as the struggling consultant, and Sarah as the successful corporate executive. Learning the truth would require them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about both of us. We tell them the truth, I decided, but we let them process it gradually. You can start by mentioning that you're changing jobs to work for a digital marketing company. Later, when you're ready, you can explain who owns that company. And if they ask why I took a lower-level position, tell them you wanted to learn something new, I suggested. It's not the whole truth, but it's not a lie either. Sarah gathered her portfolio and stood to leave, then paused at my office door. "Jane, I know this doesn't erase what I said, but I want you to know that I'm genuinely sorry. Not just sorry that I was wrong about your success, but sorry that I was so cruel about what I thought was your failure. You deserved better from me, regardless of what I believed about your circumstances." Her apology felt sincere, lacking the defensiveness or self-justification that often accompanied forced expressions of regret. It was an acknowledgement of the hurt she had caused, and a recognition that her behavior had been wrong regardless of the underlying facts. "Thank you," I said simply. "We'll see how you do over the next 6 months." After Sarah left, I sat alone in my office processing what had just happened. The sister who had humiliated me days earlier was now going to be working for my company, subject to my authority, and dependent on my evaluation for her professional future. The reversal was so complete it felt almost surreal. But more than that, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Hope that Sarah could actually learn and grow from this experience, that she could evolve beyond the narrow definitions of success that had led her to dismiss my achievements. Hope that our relationship might eventually be rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect rather than the hierarchy of perceived success that had previously defined our interactions. The next few months would reveal whether Sarah's apparent transformation was genuine or simply a response to having her worldview shocked into temporary humility. But for the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, I felt optimistic about the possibility that my sister might finally see me for who I really was. 2 weeks later, I watched from my office window as Sarah walked into the Pinnacle Digital building for her first day of work. Even from 28 floors up, I could see the difference in her posture compared to the confident woman who had arrived for her interview. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, her pace more measured, as if she were approaching something that intimidated rather than excited her. The reality of starting over in a junior position at her sister's company had apparently settled in during her final days at Morrison and Associates. Marcus had briefed me on the office gossip that had emerged after we announced Sarah's hiring. The employees were curious about the new addition to our client relations team, especially since word had spread that I had personally conducted her interview. Most assumed she was someone with impressive credentials or valuable connections, which made her placement in a junior role all the more puzzling to people who didn't understand the personal dynamics at play. I had decided not to reveal our family relationship to the staff immediately. Sarah would need to prove herself based on merit alone, without the complications that would inevitably arise if people knew she was the chairman's sister. It was better for everyone if she earned respect through her performance rather than her connections. Diana Walsh, our vice president of client relations and Sarah's new supervisor, knocked on my office door at 9:30 that morning. Diana was a sharp, no-nonsense executive who had joined Pinnacle Digital after 15 years at major advertising agencies. She had the kind of tactical intelligence and creative problem-solving skills that made her invaluable in managing our most demanding client relationships. "Jane, do you have a moment to discuss Sarah Mitchell?" Diana asked, settling into one of the chairs facing my desk. "I've completed her orientation, and I wanted to get your thoughts on how you'd like me to handle her development." I appreciated Diana's directness. She was one of the few people who knew about my relationship with Sarah, and I had specifically asked her to treat the situation with complete professional objectivity. "What's your initial assessment?" I asked, genuinely curious about Diana's perspective on my sister's capabilities. "She's definitely intelligent and well-trained in traditional corporate methodologies," Diana replied. "Her analytical skills are solid, and she understands the fundamentals of client management. But she seems uncomfortable with ambiguity and keeps asking for detailed procedures and established protocols for every situation." The assessment didn't surprise me. Sarah had spent her entire career in environments where success was measured by following proven processes and meeting predefined metrics. Pinnacle Digital's culture of experimentation and creative risk-taking would require her to develop entirely new ways of approaching problems. "How is she interacting with the team?" I asked, politely but cautiously. "She's clearly trying to make a good impression, but she's also obviously struggling to understand why she's starting at a junior level, when her resume suggests she should be in a senior position. I think she's wondering if this is some kind of test or punishment." Diana's observation was perceptive. Sarah was probably questioning whether accepting my offer had been a mistake, whether the reduced salary and lower status were worth whatever she might learn from the experience. "It is a test," I confirmed, "but not the kind she thinks. I want to see if she can adapt to an environment where innovation matters more than credentials, where taking calculated risks is more valuable than following established procedures. And if she can't adapt, then she'll have learned something important about herself, and we'll both move on," I said. "But I'm hoping she surprises us both." Over the following weeks, I found myself paying closer attention to Sarah's progress than I probably should have. Diana provided regular updates during our weekly staff meetings, and I occasionally observed Sarah's interactions with colleagues during the company-wide meetings I held monthly to discuss strategic priorities and celebrate team achievements. What I saw was a woman struggling to find her footing in an unfamiliar environment. Sarah participated actively in meetings, but her contributions were often focused on risk mitigation and process optimization, rather than the creative brainstorming that drove our most successful campaigns. She asked thoughtful questions about client needs and market research, but seemed uncomfortable when discussions moved toward experimental approaches that didn't have precedent in industry best practices. The real test came during her third week, when Diana assigned her to support the development of a marketing campaign for Stellar Fitness, a boutique gym chain that wanted to differentiate itself from larger competitors like Planet Fitness and LA Fitness. It was exactly the kind of project that required creative thinking and willingness to try unconventional approaches. I reviewed Sarah's initial research and strategy recommendations during my regular project oversight meetings with Diana. The work was competent but predictable, focusing on traditional digital advertising channels and demographic targeting strategies that any marketing firm could have proposed. "She's playing it safe," Diana observed as we discussed Sarah's approach. "The recommendations are solid, but uninspired. Nothing that would make Stellar Fitness stand out in a crowded marketplace." "What did you tell her when you reviewed the proposal?" I asked her to think bigger, to consider what would make someone choose Stellar over the major chains. She seemed frustrated by the feedback, said she needed clearer parameters about what kinds of ideas you would consider acceptable. I understood Sarah's frustration, but it also confirmed my suspicions about the limitations of her corporate training. She had been conditioned to seek approval for ideas before developing them, to minimize risk rather than maximize impact. The concept of proposing something genuinely innovative, without knowing whether it would be accepted, was foreign to her experience. Schedule a meeting with the Stellar team for next Friday, I decided. Include Sarah in the presentation, but don't tell her I'll be there. I want to observe how she handles herself when she doesn't know she's being evaluated. The meeting took place in our main conference room, with Stellar Fitness's CEO and marketing director joining us via video conference from their headquarters in Phoenix. Diana led the presentation, walking through market analysis and competitive positioning before introducing the creative concepts our team had developed. Sarah's role was to present the traditional digital marketing components of the campaign, including social media strategy, search engine optimization, and targeted advertising. She delivered her portion professionally, demonstrating solid understanding of the technical aspects of digital marketing and clearly articulating how each element would contribute to Stellar's growth objectives. But when the clients began asking questions about differentiation and innovation, about what would make their marketing campaigns memorable and shareable, Sarah visibly struggled. Her answers were technically correct but lacked the passion and creativity that characterized Pinnacle Digital's most successful presentations. "What about emerging technologies?" asked Stellar's CEO, a former competitive bodybuilder named Mike Torres, who had built his company by focusing on personal attention and community building. "We've heard about companies using virtual reality and artificial intelligence in their marketing. Is that something we should consider?" I watched Sarah's face as she processed the question. This was exactly the kind of opportunity where Pinnacle Digital's expertise in cutting-edge marketing techniques could create significant value for a client. But Sarah looked to Diana for guidance, instead of engaging directly with the possibility. Diana handled the question expertly, describing our augmented reality capabilities and suggesting ways that Stellar could create virtual workout experiences that potential members could try from home. The clients were immediately interested, asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and technical requirements. After the meeting ended and the clients disconnected, I emerged from the observation room where I had been watching the presentation. Sarah's eyes widened with surprise when she saw me, clearly wondering how long I had been there and what I had observed. "Interesting presentation," I said neutrally, addressing the team as a whole. "Diana, I'd like to discuss the AR components in more detail. Sarah, could you stay for a few minutes? I have some questions about the digital strategy elements." Diana and the other team members filed out, leaving Sarah and me alone in the conference room. I could see the tension in her shoulders as she prepared for what she probably expected to be criticism of her performance. "How do you think that went?" I asked, genuinely curious about her self-assessment. "I think I covered all the technical requirements effectively," Sarah replied carefully. The client seemed satisfied with the digital marketing approach. "But?" Sarah hesitated, clearly debating whether to acknowledge what we both knew had been a missed opportunity. "But I could have been more engaged when they asked about innovative approaches," she admitted. I defaulted to letting Diana handle the advanced technology questions instead of trying to contribute ideas myself. I was encouraged by her honesty. The old Sarah would have defended her performance and blamed unclear expectations rather than acknowledging areas where she could have done better. "Why do you think that happened?" I pressed. "Because I don't understand those technologies well enough to speak confidently about them," she said. "At Morrison and Associates, we had specialists who handled emerging tech projects. My role was to manage client relationships and ensure project deliverables were met, not to develop innovative solutions." "And how does that make you feel, knowing there are entire categories of marketing innovation that you can't contribute to?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her wrestling with the implications of my question. "It makes me feel limited," she said finally. "Like I've been working in a narrow slice of what's possible instead of understanding the full scope of what marketing can accomplish." Her answer revealed genuine self-awareness that went beyond the surface-level adjustments she had been making since starting at Pinnacle Digital. She was beginning to understand that the problem wasn't just her unfamiliarity with our specific company culture, but her entire approach to professional development and creative thinking. "What are you going to do about it?" I asked. "Learn," Sarah said, with more conviction than I had heard from her since she started working at the company. "I want to understand these technologies, not just so I can participate in presentations, but so I can contribute to developing solutions that clients haven't thought to ask for yet." I felt a surge of optimism at her response. For the first time since she had started working at Pinnacle Digital, Sarah sounded like someone who was embracing the challenge of growth, rather than simply trying to meet minimum expectations. "Diana mentioned that you've been asking for detailed procedures and established protocols," I said. "But innovation doesn't come from following procedures. It comes from understanding principles deeply enough to apply them in new ways." "I know that intellectually," Sarah replied. "But I've been trained to minimize risk by following proven approaches. Learning to think creatively about problems is harder than I expected it to be." "It's supposed to be hard," I told her. "If it were easy, everyone would be doing it. The question is whether you're willing to be uncomfortable long enough to develop new capabilities." Sarah looked directly at me for the first time since the meeting had ended, and I saw something in her expression that reminded me of conversations we had shared as children, when she was struggling to master a difficult piano piece or understand a challenging math concept. "I'm willing," she said, "but I'm going to need help. I can't figure this out entirely on my own." Her admission of vulnerability was significant. The confident corporate executive who had walked into my office a month earlier would never have acknowledged needing help or guidance. But the woman sitting across from me now seemed genuinely committed to learning, even if it meant admitting her current limitations. "All right," I said, making a decision that surprised both of us. "I'm going to assign you to work directly with our innovation team for the next month. You'll support the development of our next experimental campaign, learning about emerging technologies and creative problem-solving approaches. It won't be comfortable, and you'll probably feel lost most of the time, but you'll see how real innovation actually happens." Sarah's eyes widened with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "What kind of experimental campaign?" "We're developing a marketing strategy for a new electric vehicle startup that wants to create the first fully immersive virtual test drive experience. Potential customers would be able to experience driving their cars through different terrains and weather conditions using VR technology, all from a showroom or even their own homes." The project represented exactly the kind of cutting-edge marketing that distinguished Pinnacle Digital from traditional agencies. It required deep understanding of both automotive industry dynamics and virtual reality capabilities, along with creative vision to imagine experiences that had never existed before. "I don't know anything about electric vehicles or VR technology," Sarah said, but her voice carried curiosity rather than defeat. "Perfect," I replied. "That means you'll have to learn everything from scratch, without preconceptions about what's possible or impossible. Sometimes ignorance is an advantage in innovation projects." Over the following month, I watched Sarah's transformation with growing fascination. She threw herself into learning about electric vehicle technology, studying market research about consumer adoption barriers, and spending hours with our VR developers understanding the technical possibilities and limitations of immersive experiences. The change in her approach was dramatic. Instead of asking for procedures to follow, she began proposing ideas to test. Instead of seeking approval before exploring concepts, she started developing prototypes and gathering feedback from potential users. She made mistakes regularly, but she learned from each failure and adjusted her approach accordingly. The breakthrough came during the fourth week, when Sarah proposed an insight that nobody else on the team had considered. While reviewing consumer research about electric vehicle adoption barriers, she noticed that many potential buyers were concerned not just about performance and range, but about the social implications of owning an electric car. What if the virtual test drive experience included scenarios where they encounter other drivers? She suggested during a team brainstorming session, like stopping at a charging station and interacting with other electric vehicle owners, or pulling up to a valet service and seeing how attendants react to the car. The suggestion was brilliant because it addressed emotional and social concerns that traditional test drives couldn't fully simulate. Diana immediately saw the potential and began exploring how to incorporate social scenarios into the VR experience. When I heard about Sarah's contribution during my weekly innovation review meeting, I felt a pride that had nothing to do with family relationships and everything to do with witnessing genuine intellectual growth. She had identified an opportunity that none of our more experienced team members had recognized, demonstrating exactly the kind of creative insight that distinguished innovative thinking from conventional problem solving. But the real test of her transformation came when the electric vehicle client decided to expand the project beyond virtual test drives to include a complete digital marketing ecosystem that would guide potential customers through every stage of the purchase decision process. "We want to create something that's never been done before," explained the client's CEO during a video conference with our entire innovation team. "A marketing experience that's so engaging and informative that people will seek it out even if they're not actively shopping for a car." I watched Sarah's face during the client presentation, looking for signs of the anxiety and risk aversion that had characterized her early weeks at Pinnacle Digital. Instead, I saw engagement and excitement as she absorbed the challenge and began considering possibilities. When the client finished describing their vision and asked for our initial thoughts, Sarah was the first person to respond. "What if we created a virtual electric vehicle community that people could join before they even visit a showroom?" she proposed. "They could customize virtual versions of your cars, participate in virtual rallies and road trips with other community members, and earn rewards and recognition that translate into real-world benefits when they decide to purchase." The room fell silent as everyone processed the scope and audacity of her suggestion. She was proposing to create an entirely new category of marketing experience, one that would blur the lines between entertainment, education, and commerce. The client's CEO leaned forward in his chair, clearly intrigued. "Tell me more about how that would work." As Sarah began elaborating on her concept, explaining how virtual experiences could create emotional connections that traditional marketing couldn't achieve, I realized that she had finally understood what innovation really meant. She wasn't just applying existing solutions to new problems anymore. She was imagining possibilities that didn't exist and figuring out how to make them real. The sister who had called me broke and pathetic 4 months earlier was now proposing marketing strategies that could revolutionize how entire industries engaged with their customers. And she was doing it with the confidence and creativity of someone who had finally discovered what she was truly capable of achieving. 6 months after Sarah walked into my office as a desperate job applicant, she stood before our entire company during our quarterly all-hands meeting, presenting the results of the electric vehicle campaign that had become Pinnacle Digital's most successful project to date. The virtual community she had conceived had attracted over 50,000 members in its first month, generating pre-orders worth $12 million for our client. As I watched her field questions from colleagues who now sought her expertise on emerging marketing techniques, I felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with witnessing genuine transformation. The sister who had once dismissed my work as irrelevant was now pioneering approaches that competitors across the industry were scrambling to understand and replicate. After the meeting, Sarah approached my office with a confidence I hadn't seen since our Thanksgiving dinner, but this confidence was different. Instead of being built on assumptions and comparisons to others, it was grounded in actual achievement and hard-won knowledge. "Jane, do you have a few minutes?" she asked, and I noticed she no longer seemed nervous about initiating conversations with me. "Of course. Come in." She settled into the chair across from my desk with the ease of someone who belonged in corporate environments rather than someone struggling to find her place. "I wanted to talk about what happens next," she began. "My 6-month probationary period ends next week, and I know you'll need to make a decision about my permanent status here." I had been dreading this conversation because it meant acknowledging how completely my expectations had been exceeded. When I offered Sarah the probationary position, I had hoped she would learn enough to become a competent team member. I never imagined she would become one of our most innovative thinkers. "What would you like to see happen?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective on her own future. "I want to stay," she said without hesitation. "Not just because this is a good company, or because the work is interesting, but because I've finally found something I'm actually good at. Something that challenges me to grow, instead of just managing what already exists. Her answer revealed how much her understanding of professional fulfillment had evolved. The sister who had once measured success by salary and status now spoke about capability and contribution. "And the family situation?" I asked. "Are you comfortable with the complexity of reporting to your sister?" Sarah smiled, and for the first time in months, it reminded me of the genuine warmth we had shared as children, before competition and comparison had complicated our relationship. "I think we've proven that we can separate professional and personal dynamics," she said. "You've never given me special treatment or made exceptions because we're related. If anything, you've held me to higher standards than you hold other employees." She was right about that. I had been harder on Sarah than necessary, partly to ensure that no one could accuse me of favoritism, and partly because I needed to know that her transformation was genuine rather than performative. "There's something I need to tell you," Sarah continued, her expression becoming more serious. "Last week, Morrison and Associates offered me my old position back at a 20% salary increase. They heard about the electric vehicle campaign and want me to lead their new innovation division." My heart sank as I absorbed what she was telling me. After everything we had both invested in her development, after the progress she had made and the relationship she had built at Pinnacle Digital, she was considering leaving for a higher-paying position at her former company. "And?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "And I turned them down immediately," she said, breaking into a smile at my obvious relief. "Jane, 6 months ago I would have jumped at that offer because it represented everything I thought I wanted. More money, a prestigious title, recognition from people I respected, but I've learned that those things are meaningless if you're not actually creating value or growing as a person." Her rejection of Morrison and Associates' offer told me everything I needed to know about the authenticity of her transformation. The old Sarah would have been tempted by the salary increase and impressed by the opportunity to return as a conquering hero. The woman sitting in my office had developed different priorities. "I'm offering you the permanent position of Senior Innovation Strategist," I said, making a decision that felt both personally and professionally right. "It's a newly created role that would make you responsible for identifying emerging technologies and developing experimental campaigns for our most ambitious clients." Sarah's face lit up with excitement that was impossible to fake. "That sounds perfect. Thank you for taking a chance on me, Jane. I know I didn't deserve it initially." "You earned it through your work," I corrected her. "The person you were 6 months ago might not have deserved the opportunity, but the person you've become absolutely does." That evening, I called our parents to share the news about Sarah's permanent position at Pinnacle Digital. I had been gradually revealing the truth about my company over the past few months, watching their shock and pride as they realized the extent of what I had built while they thought I was struggling. "Your father and I are so proud of both of you," my mother said when I finished explaining Sarah's role in our recent successes. "We always knew you were both special, but we had no idea how much we were underestimating what you were capable of achieving." The conversation felt different from our previous family discussions. Instead of focusing on conventional markers of success or comparing our achievements to external expectations, we talked about creativity, innovation, and the satisfaction that came from building something meaningful. Later that week, Sarah and I attended our cousin David's wedding together, the first family event we had shared since the Thanksgiving dinner that had changed everything. As we sat at the reception watching David and his new wife dance their first dance, Sarah turned to me with an expression of gratitude and newfound understanding. "I keep thinking about that night when I called you broke and pathetic," she said quietly. "I was so wrong, not just about your circumstances, but about what actually matters in life. You were building something extraordinary while I was just climbing ladders other people had constructed." "We both learned important lessons," I replied, feeling generous toward this sister who had become a valued colleague and genuine friend. "You learned to think creatively and take meaningful risks. I learned that hiding my achievements didn't protect me from judgment, it just delayed the reckoning." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Do you ever regret revealing your identity? Giving up the anonymity that had served you so well?" I considered her question as I watched our family members celebrating around us. People who now saw both of us differently than they had just months earlier. "No," I said finally, because keeping it secret meant living according to other people's definitions of success and failure. Now I get to define those things for myself. As we drove home that night, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought us to this point. What had begun as a moment of cruel humiliation had evolved into an opportunity for both of us to discover capabilities we hadn't known we possessed. Sarah had learned to innovate and create rather than just manage and optimize. I had learned to claim credit for my achievements and refuse to accept others' limited perceptions of my worth. The revenge I had imagined when I scheduled Sarah's interview had been replaced by something much more valuable: genuine respect, professional collaboration, and a rebuilt relationship based on mutual appreciation, rather than competitive comparison. Pinnacle Digital continued to grow and thrive, but now it felt less like my solitary creation and more like something we were building together. Sarah's innovative thinking had opened new possibilities for the company, while my foundational vision provided the stability and direction needed to turn creative concepts into sustainable success. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying the people who underestimate you. Sometimes it's proving them so completely wrong that they have no choice but to recognize your true worth while discovering their own potential in the process. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.